The alarm didn't scream. It whispered. That's the part nobody tells you about a real emergency. The bad ones don't sound like sirens. They sound like a single soft chime, almost polite, telling you that somewhere out in the dark, something has already gone catastrophically wrong. I am Vex Ithari, and I have sat at this console for 26 cycles. I have watched freighters lose cargo, shuttles lose power, and once, memorably, a diplomat lose his temper hard enough to vent an airlock by accident. None of that prepared me for the chime I heard that shift. My carapace does something humans don't have a word for when I'm afraid. The plates along my spine lift, just slightly, like a bird raising its feathers before a storm. They were lifted now. I reached for the signal before I'd even finished the thought, and the moment the words resolved on my display, I understood why. Freighter, hollow bloom. Hull breach, Section 4. Life support, critical. 53 Threnian younglings aboard, 53. I read it twice, certain I'd misjudged the number. I hadn't. The Threnian matriarchy does not forgive carelessness with its children. They are a species that measures its wealth not in credits or territory, but in the number of younglings who survive to see their second son. 53 of them, drifting toward a graveyard of dead ships we call the Shrike Belt, was not a tragedy. It was, in the language of Threnian law, an extinction-level offense against an entire generation of a founding family. My assistant, a small trembling creature named Pell, appeared at my side before I'd even called for him. "Sir, I heard the chime from the corridor. Please tell me it's a drill." It was not a drill. I pulled up the coordinates and felt something cold settle in my thorax. The hollow bloom wasn't just drifting near the Shrike Belt. It was drifting into it, propelled by a dying engine that had locked its thrusters at full burn in the wrong direction. Whoever was flying that ship, if anyone still was, had perhaps 5 hours before the hull gave out entirely, and far less than that before the debris field tore it apart on its own. "Get me every vessel within response range," I said. Now, Pell's hands moved across his console, and I watched his trembling get worse with every passing second. That is never a good sign. When he finally looked up, his voice cracked. "Sir, there's only one. One ship. In a sector this size, patrolled by 3 separate fleets, there should have been a dozen options. There was one. Registry?" He swallowed. "Human, a salvage tug, independent operator." I had encountered humans exactly 4 times in my career, and all 4 times I had come away with the distinct impression that the species had been designed by a committee that couldn't agree on anything except recklessness. They were new to galactic society, barely 3 generations past first contact, and they had a reputation for treating danger the way other species treated a mild inconvenience. I did not want to trust 53 younglings to a human. I did not have a choice. I had a dozen questions and no time to ask any of them. What condition was her ship in? Whether she had ever flown anything remotely close to the Shrike Belt before. Whether a single independent operator, working alone, could possibly manage what a coordinated fleet response would have struggled to accomplish under ideal conditions. None of it mattered. She was what existed within range, and the alternative was watching 53 younglings run out of air on my own display while I waited for a better option that would never arrive in time. "Patch me through," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. The connection crackled, then cleared, and a voice answered that was nothing like what I expected. It was calm, almost bored. "Salvage tug Widow's Reach. This is Captain Sable Renn. You're cutting into my coffee, so this better be good." I explained the situation in the fewest words I could manage. The freighter, the younglings, the engine burning them straight into the Shrike Belt. The 5 hours, shrinking by the second before the atmosphere failed entirely. There was a silence on the other end of the line that stretched long enough that I checked my instruments, certain the connection had dropped. It hadn't. When she spoke again, something in her tone had changed completely. "Send me the coordinates." "Captain, the Shrike Belt is classified as unnavigable. No vessel has attempted." "Send me the coordinates," she said again, and this time there was no room in her voice for argument. I can talk you through my life story once those kids are breathing easy. Right now you're wasting the only advantage they've got. I sent the coordinates. My claws were shaking as I did it. Copy, she said. Widow's Reach inbound. And Vex, that's your name, right? Do me a favor and don't watch too closely. It's going to look worse than it is. I did not find that reassuring in the slightest. I watched anyway. For the first 20 minutes, nothing seemed wrong. Her tug moved through open space at a speed that made my sensors flag a dozen safety violations. But that was expected of humans. It was what happened at the edge of the Shrike Belt that made Pell stop breathing entirely. The debris field wasn't just wreckage. It was the graveyard of an old war. 3 centuries of broken warships locked in a slow, silent collision course with each other, their hulls grinding and drifting in patterns no navigation system could fully predict. Even the most experienced pilots in the sector gave the Shrike Belt a wide berth. Sable Renn flew straight into it. Captain, radiation levels in that sector are lethal to unshielded systems within... I know, she said, and I could hear something scraping against her hull, a long metallic shriek that made my plates lift again. Working on it. I watched her ship on my display, a single small dot weaving between wrecks the size of small moons, and I understood for the first time why humans made every other species in the galaxy nervous. It wasn't recklessness. It was something worse. It was competence wearing the mask of recklessness, and I had no idea yet which one I was actually looking at. Then her voice returned, sharper now. Visual on the hollow bloom. She's tumbling. Lost all attitude control. And Vex, I've got a problem. My spine plates rose so fast it hurt. What problem? There's a debris cluster 40 minutes out that's going to intersect her position. If I don't get those kids off before then, I won't need to rescue anyone. I'll just need a very large bag. Then don't attempt it, I said, my voice rising in a way that was distinctly unprofessional for a traffic controller of my seniority. Wait for backup. There is no backup, she snapped. There's me. Now either help me find a docking angle on that wreck or get off the channel so I can concentrate. I pulled every scrap of data I had on the Hollow Bloom's hull structure and threw it at her without another word of protest. Whatever she was, panic clearly wasn't going to slow her down, and I was starting to suspect that was exactly the problem. Her ship closed the final distance in a way that defied every model of debris navigation I had ever studied. She wasn't dodging the wreckage. She was reading it, threading gaps that opened and closed in seconds, matching the freighter's chaotic tumble with a precision that made Pell whisper something in his own language that I chose not to ask him to translate. Docking on the emergency hatch, she said. It's not rated for this. Neither am I, probably. Here goes. The sound that came through the channel next was one I will remember until the day I die. Metal shrieking against metal, the Widow's Reach's hull groaning under a stress load that should have torn it in half. And then, silence. Docked, she said, breathing hard. Vex, talk to me. How long until that debris cluster arrives? I checked the numbers and felt my thorax go cold. 31 minutes. Then I've got 30 to get 53 scared kids through a hatch that isn't designed for boarding, she said, and I swear I could hear her grinning. Piece of cake. I pulled up the interior feed from the freighter's emergency cameras, and what I saw made my breath catch. The younglings were pressed into the far corner of the cargo hold, their translucent membranes gone a sickly gray from oxygen deprivation, several of the smallest already unconscious. A Threnian child's membrane only turns that color once. After that, there is no color left to turn. Captain, several younglings show critical hypoxia. You may not have... I know what I have, she said, and her voice had gone quiet in a way that unsettled me more than her shouting would have. Which is exactly enough time if nobody talks to me for the next 20 minutes. Ran out. The silence that followed was the longest of my career. I watched the clock. I watched the debris cluster. I watched Pell chew on the edge of his own claw, a nervous habit he insisted he'd quit years ago. At the 9-minute mark, her voice returned, and it was nothing like the sharp clipped tone from before. It was warm, soft, the kind of voice you'd use on something small and frightened, because that was exactly what she was talking to. Hey there. I know you're scared. I know none of this makes sense right now. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to grab the hand of the friend next to you, and I need both of you to follow me. Can you do that? I don't know how she got 53 terrified, oxygen-starved children to move in an orderly line through a hatch never designed for evacuation, but she did. One by one, the feed showed small shapes crossing into her ship, carried by her own arms when they couldn't walk, coaxed by her voice when they were too frightened to move. At the 17-minute mark, one of the younglings, the smallest one barely conscious, grabbed the sleeve of her suit and asked a question the translator rendered flatly, without any of the terror underneath it. Are we going to die? There was a pause on the feed. I watched her kneel down to the child's level, her voice steady in a way that should have been impossible given everything I knew about human physiology and stress response. Not today, she said. I promise you, not today. At the 22-minute mark, with 9 minutes left before the debris cluster arrived, she announced the last youngling secured, and I realized I had been holding a breath I didn't know insects like me were capable of holding. Undocking now, she said. Vex, please tell me you've got a clear path back. I did not have a clear path back. What I had was a debris cluster now 6 minutes from impact and a return route that ran directly through the densest part of the Shrike Belt. I told her anyway because there was no other option. And because some very small, very illogical part of me had already decided to trust her. The return flight was worse than the approach. Her ship, heavier now, sluggish under the added mass of 53 passengers and a structural frame already strained past its limits, limped through gaps that seemed to close faster than she could clear them. Twice my sensors flagged an imminent collision. Twice, by some combination of instinct and desperation I still can't fully explain, she found a path through that shouldn't have existed. At the 4-minute mark, a piece of wreckage the size of a transport shuttle tumbled directly into her projected course, and I stopped breathing entirely. Captain, I see it, she said, and her voice was tight now, stripped of all its earlier calm. Hold on back there, everyone. This is going to get bumpy. What happened next, I still don't have adequate words for. She didn't dodge the wreckage. She dove beneath it, dropping the Widow's Reach into a spin that should have torn the ship apart under the stress alone, threading a gap so narrow my instruments read it as a collision before her hull cleared it by less than a body length. Then silence. Open space. The edge of the Shrike Belt behind her and the debris cluster detonating against a dead warship exactly where her ship had been 30 seconds earlier. Widow's Reach to station control, she said, and her voice was shaking now, the exhaustion finally breaking through. Package delivered. 53, all accounted for, requesting priority medical. I could not speak for several seconds. When I finally found my voice, it came out smaller than I intended. Medical team standing by, Captain. That was... I searched for a word large enough and failed to find one. That was not possible. Yeah, well, she said, and I could hear the grin returning even through her exhaustion. Nobody told my ship that. She almost didn't make it back at all, halfway through the return leg, with the debris cluster still closing and her ship groaning under the strain of 53 extra lives. One of her stabilizers failed completely. I watched the readout flatline on my display and felt something in my chest seize up in a way I had no biological reason to expect. Captain, your portside stabilizer just went dark. Yeah, I noticed, she said, and her voice had gone tight, clipped, every trace of humor stripped out of it. Working on it. Working on it turned out to mean something I still find difficult to fully process. She cut power to 2 of the ship's non-essential systems, rerouted what remained through a manual override that should have taken an engineering crew 20 minutes to configure, and did it in under 90 seconds while simultaneously flying a crippled ship through a field of tumbling wreckage. Stabilizer's back, she said, finally breathing hard. Not pretty, but it'll hold. How did you do that in 90 seconds? Practice, she said, and a healthy amount of not wanting to explain to 53 sets of parents why their kids didn't make it the last leg of the trip. A pause. Also, mild terror. Mild terror is a great motivator, Vex. You should try it sometime. I did not find that reassuring in the slightest, but the ship held, and 30 seconds later she cleared the edge of the debris field with the detonating cluster lighting up her aft cameras like a small, furious sun. By the time her tug reached the station, word had already spread. The docking bay was crowded with medical personnel, station security, and a growing cluster of onlookers pressed against every observation window along the corridor. I made my way there myself, leaving my post for the first time in 6 years of continuous service, because I needed to see this human with my own eyes. She was smaller than the voice on the comm had suggested. Average height, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, a jacket torn at one shoulder where something had clearly grazed her during the docking maneuver. She looked, more than anything, like someone who badly wanted to sit down and had decided that could wait. "Captain Renn," I said, approaching slowly, uncertain of the correct human protocol for what I was feeling. "What you did today has no precedent in 26 cycles of my service." She shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement. "Kids needed help. I was the one who could give it. Not exactly a complicated equation, Vex." Before I could respond, the crowd near the bay entrance parted, and a delegation of Threnian officials swept through it with a speed that suggested they had not waited for proper clearance. At their head walked an elder, whose deep violet membrane marked her as one of the eldest living members of the matriarchy. Council Elder Issa, a name I recognized from a dozen treaty negotiations I had monitored over the years. Sable straightened, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across her face that looked distinctly like nerves. "Is that who I think it is?" "Brace yourself," I told her. "The Threnian do not express gratitude quietly." Elder Issa crossed the bay with a gravity that silenced every conversation in the room, and stopped directly in front of Sable, her ancient eyes studying the human with an intensity that made even me uncomfortable to witness. "Captain Renn," she said, her translated voice carrying to every corner of the bay. "You have saved 53 younglings today. Among them, my own granddaughter." Sable's expression shifted from nervous to something far more complicated. "Elder Issa, I just did what needed doing." "No," Issa said, and the word landed with the weight of law. "What you did, few would have attempted. Fewer still would have survived attempting it." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the human as though reassessing something fundamental. "Your species is new to us, Captain. Tell me, what else are you capable of?" The question hung in the recycled air of the docking bay, and I noticed that I was not the only one who felt a chill at hearing it asked aloud. Elder Issa reached into the folds of her ceremonial robe and produced a small, luminous object, a pendant carved from a stone found only on the Threnian homeworld, its surface shifting with patterns that seemed to respond to the light. "This is the Ember Crown," she said. "It has been given only 12 times in our recorded history. You are the 13th, and the first who is not Threnian." Sable stared at the pendant as it was placed around her neck, and for the first time since I'd met her, she seemed to have run entirely out of words. "Say nothing," Issa told her. "Only know that my people will not forget this day. We will remember Sable Renn, who valued the lives of children she had never met above her own safety." She paused, and something almost gentle crossed her ancient features. "This story will be told to younglings not yet born." It was told, and quickly. Within hours, the footage from the docking bay had reached every major news network in 3 sectors. Within a day, it had crossed into the core systems entirely. Sable Renn, the salvage tug captain who had flown into the Shrike Belt and come out the other side with 53 children still breathing, became something the galaxy hadn't quite had a category for before. 3 days after the rescue, I received a communication that made my spine plates rise for an entirely different reason. Director Corvani, a notoriously humorless Ashvellan who had never once expressed enthusiasm in the 4 decades I'd known him, was demanding an immediate press conference. "Coordinate it," he said, his voice flat as always. "Main atrium. Captain Renn will speak." "Director, she has no experience with media of this scale." "Irrelevant," he said. "Every network in the sector is requesting access. Make it happen, Vex." I found her in the station's cantina, 3 cups of some dark human beverage already emptied in front of her. Dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept since the rescue. "Captain Renn." "Sable's fine," she said, not looking up. "I think we're past the formalities at this point, Vex." "Sable, then. You are expected to address the press in 4 hours." She nearly choked on her drink. "A what?" "No, absolutely not. I haul salvage for a living. That is the entire extent of my professional skill set." The Commerce Authority, the Threnian Matriarchy, and approximately 600 million beings across 3 sectors appear to disagree with that assessment, I told her, and watched her expression collapse into something between horror and resignation. The press conference was, by any objective measure, a disaster. It was also, somehow, exactly what the galaxy needed to see. She stood at the podium looking like she would rather have been flying back into the Shrike Belt, gripping the edges hard enough that her knuckles went pale. "Hi," she started, her voice cracking on the single syllable. "I'm Sable Renn. Apparently I'm supposed to talk about the rescue, so, yeah, that happened." A reporter near the front leaned forward immediately. "Captain Renn, when you first received the distress call, what was your immediate reaction?" "Honestly? That somebody was having the worst day of their life, and that I might be in a position to make it slightly less bad." A pause. "That's really all it was at the start." "Were you afraid?" "Terrified," she admitted, and something in her honesty seemed to catch the entire room off guard. The Shrike Belt is not a joke, but being scared doesn't mean you don't act. It just means you act very, very carefully while your heart tries to climb out through your ribs. Many analysts are calling your piloting abilities during the rescue nothing short of supernatural. How did you develop skills like that? She actually laughed at that one. Supernatural? No. I grew up flying salvage runs through the debris rings around my home colony. You either get good at threading tight gaps or you become a permanent fixture in the wreckage yourself. There's nothing mystical about it. There's just a lot of very expensive practice. One reporter, a sharp-eyed Velithi with a reputation for difficult questions, asked her directly whether she thought her actions reflected well on humanity as a whole, or whether she worried about the pressure of suddenly representing an entire species in the public eye. Sable considered the question longer than any other that day. "I think that's a trap, honestly," she said finally, drawing a nervous laugh from somewhere in the crowd. "If I say yes, I sound arrogant. If I say no, it sounds like I don't think what I did matters. So I'll just say this. I'm one person. I don't get to decide what an entire species is like, and I wouldn't want that job even if someone offered it to me. All I can tell you is what I did, and why. What anyone else decides that means about humans in general is honestly none of my business." Every answer she gave seemed to disarm the room a little further. Her honesty, her refusal to inflate what had happened into something grander than it was, the way she deflected every attempt to call her extraordinary while making the objectively impossible sound almost routine. Then a younger reporter near the back asked the question that silenced the entire atrium. "Captain Renn, why did you do it? You had no obligation. No one would have blamed you for refusing a mission with those odds. So why?" Sable was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I found myself leaning forward without meaning to. "My grandmother used to tell me that the measure of a person isn't what they do when people are watching, or when there's a reward on the other side," she said finally, her voice quieter now, but somehow carrying further than it had all conference. "It's what they do when nobody would ever know, when there's no benefit except the fact that you tried." She paused. "Those kids didn't know me. They'd never met a human before. They were just scared and running out of time. If I'd sat there and calculated the odds and decided my own safety mattered more, I could have lived with that decision. Legally. But I couldn't have lived with it any other way. So I didn't make that decision. That's the whole story." The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds before the applause began, spreading through the atrium like something contagious. Beings of a dozen species expressing approval in a dozen different ways at once. And I noticed, Watching from the side of the room, that Sable looked more uncomfortable in that moment than she had at any point during the actual rescue. 2 weeks later, I received notice that the Galactic Assembly had requested her presence at the Central Council Station to formally present the humanitarian commendation, an honor reserved for beings who had rendered exceptional service across species lines. When I told her, she looked for a moment genuinely close to fleeing the station entirely. "Absolutely not," she said. "I'll say something wrong and start an actual interstellar incident, Vex. I'm telling you." "You have already addressed the entire sector's press corps without incident," I reminded her. "The Assembly is not asking you to negotiate treaties. They wish only to honor you." "That's somehow worse." The journey to the Central Assembly took 3 days, most of which Sable spent pacing her cabin and drinking what I suspected was an unhealthy quantity of caffeine. When we finally arrived at the station, a vast structure suspended between 3 suns, its corridors filled with ships and species from every corner of known space. She stopped at an observation port and simply stared for a long time in silence. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "It is," I agreed. And something in her expression in that moment told me this human understood exactly how far she had come from a salvage cockpit in a debris ring, and exactly how uncertain she still was about what came next. The ceremony took place in the Grand Assembly Hall, a chamber so immense that weather occasionally formed near its distant ceiling. Council Speaker Morvath, an ancient being whose species had crossed the stars before humanity had mastered fire, addressed the gathered representatives of every council world. "We gather today," Morvath began, "to recognize an act that transcends the boundaries between our species. Captain Sable Renn risked everything, her ship, her safety, her life, to save children she had never met, of a species she barely knew, for no reason beyond the simple conviction that their lives were worth the risk." When it was finally her turn to speak, Sable approached the podium with a steadiness that surprised even me. "Honored council members," she began, "I'll be honest with you. I feel a little bit like a fraud standing here." A ripple of murmurs moved through the hall. Not because what happened wasn't real. It was very real and very terrifying. But because everyone keeps treating it like it was something extraordinary, and where I come from, we have a saying: see something, say something, do something. That's the whole idea. You notice a problem, you speak up, and then you act on it. That's all I did. She paused, and the silence in the massive hall was absolute. I saw children in danger. I called for help, and when I realized I was the only help available, I did something about it. I'm not exceptionally brave. I'm just someone who happened to be in a position to act and chose to. And honestly, I think most beings, regardless of species, would make the same choice if they found themselves in that position. The instinct to help isn't unique to humans. It's what connects every one of us in this hall. She lifted the commendation. I accept this not for myself, but for everyone who has ever made the hard choice to help when helping was difficult. That's who this really belongs to. The applause that followed was unlike anything I had witnessed in my entire career. Beings from 100 worlds standing in unison, expressing approval in every form their biology allowed, and I found myself standing among them, feeling something I did not have adequate words for, even now. But it was something Elder Issa said to me quietly afterward as the crowds began to disperse, that I have never been able to fully shake. "You watched her do the impossible, Vexithari," she said, her ancient eyes fixed on the departing crowd. One human, a single ship, 53 lives saved through nothing but skill and refusal to accept failure. She turned to look at me directly. Now ask yourself what 1,000 of them, working in concert, might be capable of achieving or preventing. I did not have an answer for her. I am not certain even now that I want one. 3 months after the rescue, the Commerce Authority announced the formation of a new Rapid Response Division for emergencies in unpatrolled sectors, a modified salvage vessel equipped with enhanced engines, medical bays, and hazardous navigation systems. Its captain, to the surprise of absolutely no one who had followed the story, was Sable Renn. Her missions since have become the stuff of increasingly implausible legend. A research outpost pulled from a collapsing power grid, a data probe recovered from the edge of a black hole's accretion disk, a mining crew extracted from an asteroid mid-collapse. Each mission added another layer to a reputation that had by then outgrown any single species' ability to contain it. But something quieter happened alongside the legend, something I suspect will matter far more in the long run. Other pilots, human and otherwise, began volunteering for the Rapid Response Division in numbers no one had projected. They came from a dozen species with a dozen different skill sets, but carrying the same fundamental willingness Sable had shown in the Shrike Belt. The readiness to act when action was hard and dangerous, and offered no guarantee of survival. One incident from that period has stayed with me longer than almost any other. A young human recruit named Toma had joined the Rapid Response Division straight out of training, drawn in, like so many others, by the story of the Shrike Belt rescue. 6 months into his service, he came to me in the observation lounge looking like a being who had made a terrible mistake and was too proud to admit it. "I don't think I'm cut out for this," he told me, staring out at the stars rather than at me. "Every mission I freeze for half a second before I move. Just half a second. But I keep thinking that half a second is going to get somebody killed someday." I did not know how to answer him, so I did the only thing that seemed useful. I called Sable. She arrived within the hour, still in her flight suit from a mission she'd clearly cut short to get there, and sat down across from Toma without any of the ceremony I might have expected given who she'd become. "You froze," she said. "For half a second." "Yes, ma'am." "You know what I did the first time I flew into a debris field with someone else's life on the line?" She let the question hang there a moment. "I froze for 4 full seconds. Not half, 4. I still think about that 4 seconds more than I think about anything I got right that day." She leaned forward. "The difference between you and someone who shouldn't be doing this job isn't whether you freeze. Everybody freezes. The difference is what you do in the second after." Toma didn't say anything for a long moment. "How do you know I'll do the right thing in that second?" "I don't," she said simply. "Nobody does until it happens. But you came here because something in you wanted to be the kind of person who tries. That's not nothing, Toma. That's the entire foundation everything else gets built on." She stood, clapping a hand on his shoulder in a gesture I've since learned is a fairly universal human sign of reassurance. "Now get some sleep. You've got a shift in 6 hours, and freezing is a lot worse when you're exhausted." I watched him afterward over the following months, and something in him had visibly settled. He is, as of this recording, one of the most requested pilots in the entire Rapid Response Division, a fact I suspect he would attribute entirely to a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes with a woman who never once told him that his fear didn't matter, only that it didn't have to be the thing that stopped him. I still speak with her occasionally, our professional relationship having settled somewhat improbably into something resembling friendship. She stops by the station between missions when her route allows it, always with a new story about some catastrophe narrowly avoided, through a combination of skill and what she insists on calling aggressive optimism. The last time I saw her in person, she was preparing for a mission to extract a diplomatic vessel stranded near the event horizon of a collapsing star. A mission every sane calculation suggested she should decline. "That sounds unnecessarily dangerous," I told her. "Not for the first time." "Probably," she agreed, entirely too cheerfully for someone about to fly toward a black hole. "But there are kids on that ship too, and apparently I have a reputation to maintain now." "Your reputation will not protect you from a singularity, Sable." "True," she said, grinning as she climbed into her cockpit. "But my upgraded engines and my devastating good looks might just do the trick." The reports came back 3 days later. She had extracted the diplomatic vessel successfully, though the maneuver had reportedly pushed both her ship and her crew to the absolute edge of survivable stress. The rescued diplomats praised her skill, her calm under pressure, and, according to at least 2 separate accounts, her seemingly bottomless supply of terrible jokes that had somehow kept an entire vessel of terrified officials from panicking during the extraction. I still sit at my console, coordinating traffic through this sector, day after day, cycle after cycle. But whenever a junior controller tells me a rescue is impossible, that the odds are too poor, that the mission should be abandoned before it's attempted, I think of a single small ship threading an unnavigable graveyard of dead warships with 53 lives depending entirely on the skill of one exhausted, terrified, absolutely determined human pilot. And I remind them that impossible is often just a word other species use to describe a problem they haven't met a human yet to solve. But I have also started reading, in what little spare time I have left, everything I can find about human history. Quietly, carefully, the way you'd study a species you have begun to suspect you never fully understood. What I've found looks less like a series of isolated miracles and more like a pattern the rest of the galaxy simply hasn't had time to notice yet. We welcomed a species of wolves into galactic society, and for 3 generations, we called them sheep because they arrived polite and eager and new. I have started to wonder how much longer that mistake is going to last, and I am no longer entirely certain the answer will comfort me. If this story pulled you in, hit like and subscribe for more tales of humanity rising among the stars.